I'm getting over a cold, that's why I sound like this. Have you ever stopped and just thought about the fact that Transformers is over 40 years old as a franchise? Now, that might not sound like much, but when you really think about it, most things don't stay that popular for that long. It's been a cornerstone of multiple generations of children now. Transformers has been around long enough to go through countless reinventions and new universes, new continuities, and it's made things a little bit confusing after all this time. Don't get me wrong, you go to any Tom, Dick, or Stanley and say, hey, do you know who Optimus Prime is? They'll tell you who he is. But do you think they could tell you which Optimus Prime this particular one is? That's the thing about being a long-running series that's gone through different iterations. We've gone through many different versions of most of these characters. So, we want to get to know Soundwave. Soundwave, my favorite Decepticon, but still one that has gone through so many reinventions. I mean, for instance, if we're just talking about the main medium of Transformers, which is television animation, we've gone through 7 different iterations that have a major Soundwave. That's not counting the times he's shown up in video games, movies, comic books. There's a lot of different versions of this guy, and most of them have toy representation. Now, when you're an adult and you can kind of differentiate between these things, that's fine. You know how to find the Soundwave you want. But if you're casual or if you're a kid, you really don't know what separates this Soundwave from that Soundwave. And that can be a real problem when you're looking for the Soundwave you specifically grew up with. This video is just meant to go over the major iterations of Soundwave and what the most popular or best version of that design is in toy form. But you can only have one first, and that's of course the Transformers, now known as Transformers Generation 1. Soundwave was the breakout character from the G1 cartoon. He was easily the most popular, especially amongst the Decepticons. It helps that his voice modulation and the tape gimmick made him so much more unique and gave him so much more character than so many of his other contemporaries. In terms of his figure, it's great. A lot of times with G1 figures, you kind of have to cut them some slack, right? You have to be like, oh, well, it was actually toys from the 70s, or sometimes they don't have the best articulation, sometimes they have bad transformations. You don't have to make those excuses with Soundwave. Sure, his shoulders are a bit stiff, but everything else is articulation you basically find on a modern figure. The proportions are great, the transformation is incredibly solid, and he has the tape cassette gimmick. If you are trying to build up a G1 collection, Soundwave is honestly a really good figure to look into towards the beginning. Sure, Optimus is far more iconic, and in some ways he is a more fun figure, but Soundwave is the G1 figure that comes the closest to feeling like a modern Transformers figure, which is why nowadays a lot of the modern Soundwaves really do just kind of fix his proportions slightly. This was a wonderful place for Soundwave to start. He's still considered the best figure from the first year of the Transformers and one of the best ones from G1 as a whole. So it's kind of amazing to think that after this guy, he didn't get another major figure until 10 years later. Now, that's not to say that there weren't Soundwaves in between. Of course, there was the Action Master Soundwave, but let's be honest, that was not a major Soundwave figure. There was things like the Beast Wars Soundwave and the Machine Wars Soundwave, and we'll talk about them later, but neither of these are really what we're looking for this opening bit of the video. To find the next major iteration of Soundwave, we have to go all the way to Transformers Cybertron. Now, this Soundwave is legitimately really interesting in terms of what they were going for. Instead of being a tape deck, he was an alien spaceship from Planet X, the same planet that Sideways was from. That said, you'd still see a lot of design aesthetics from the original G1 Soundwave, the faceplate, the head design, the fact that his chest is still designed to invoke the tape deck, and of course he still came with Laserbeak. This figure is not the best. It has a lot of issues when it comes to the transformation kibble. There's some balancing issues, articulation's not the best, but it is a unique Soundwave, and it's kind of funny to think that this was our second go at the character. And weirdly enough, the spaceship did kind of go on to give us a new design identity for Soundwave, as you'll see with some of the future figures. The next place Soundwave would show up would be the movies, but we're going to talk about the movies on their own later. Their next appearance in animation was going to be Transformers Animated, and the figure here is really cool. This is still one of my favorite versions of Soundwave ever. He turns into a real Ford Flex looking car. You can see how they've turned his paint job into kind of invoking the tape cassette shapes, especially on the doors. And of course he comes with his electric guitar, which turns into Laserbeak. In a later repaint, it would actually be a keytar that turns into Ratbat. This Soundwave is interesting. He has the gold around the door and the gold on the faceplate, like the Transformers Cybertron version. His head design is more similar to the Cybertron version, and his overall style is entirely his own. Sure, the chest still invokes the tape deck, but other than that, they weren't really trying to make this Soundwave look just like any other Soundwave. That was the beauty of Transformers Animated, was each of these characters were getting as reinvented as possible. Oh, look at that, we're going from one of the best Transformers cartoons of all time to the other best Transformers cartoon of all time. Transformers Prime had an amazing Soundwave. They gave him a new transformation, turning into a drone. Now, drones, unique. We never had a spy drone or military drone in Transformers before. We still haven't had one since. And it makes sense for Soundwave. That's a perfect vehicle mode for him. And this is where I say Cybertron actually had a little bit more lasting influence on Soundwave than we would have thought. That was the first time they gave him a flying vehicle mode, and now we can see Prime going right back into the idea of giving him a atypical stranger flying vehicle mode as his main mode. Alongside that, this Soundwave also includes a Laserbeak. However, instead of Laserbeak being a tape deck, he now turns into Soundwave's chest armor. The figure, I'm not gonna lie, is a bit much. You look at it and it's kind of hard to make out details because there's so much sculpted detail. It's all a similar color. The design on camera within the show is mind-boggling. An amazing depiction of Soundwave. And the toy itself is still really, really good. It's just a bit messy for my taste when it comes to an action figure, but it still captures the figure incredibly well, gives you a really fun transformation, and if you want, there's a little company called APC that has done a really nice redo of this figure that's basically just the mold with more paint and some fixed engineering, and he includes Soundwave's tentacles. Now, officially, Prime Soundwave is the middle chapter of the three parts of the aligned continuity. There was the War and Fall of Cybertron video games, then Prime, then Robots in Disguise 2015. Gone is the creepy proportions, the silence, the things that made Prime Soundwave so unique. We now have a very boxy Soundwave that does slightly invoke the War for Cybertron mode, but in all honesty, it's kind of just its own thing. I do like how burly this Soundwave looks. It's just not my favorite. Soundwave would next show up in Transformers Cyberverse, in which he was most people's favorite Decepticon, it felt like, at least when Season 3 came around. And he was a really good version of Soundwave. He took some cues from the IDW comics, made him a little bit more sympathetic, and he lost the more stoic parts of his personality to focus more on being a spy master with a bit of a sarcastic sense of humor. We have two different versions we could pick from. There is the Warrior Soundwave. He has a gimmick in which Laserbeak comes out of his chest. And then there was the Deluxe Soundwave, which was made for older collectors and has a more intense transformation and better paint. Our final major TV appearance of Soundwave was the Earthrise Soundwave. One of the most unique designs the character has ever had. He turns into a flying wing, again kind of calling back to Cybertron, while also giving him a stealth flying alt mode that is perfect for Soundwave. So why can't I get a good toy of it? We've had one figure for Earthspark, the one-step changer. And I'm not here to knock one-step changers, right? I'm not going to be like, oh, one-step changers are not for adult collectors. No, they're fun, they're fine. But I want something more than this. At least it's not just the Cyberverse Soundwave repainted again, which it could have happened. Well, that was a depressing way to end off the television talk. Why don't we jump over to video games? Transformers is weirdly enough a series that hasn't had many. Like, I mean, sure, there was an Armada video game, there was Devastation, but those are all G1 designs. In terms of video game that started off as its own thing, it's really just the War for and Fall of Cybertron games. And to be fair, these are some of the best games ever in my opinion. I adore both of them. Thankfully, a number of these designs have been turned into toys over the years. and Soundwave has gotten two, a Voyager Fall of Cybertron version and a Deluxe War for Cybertron version. I would actually go with the Deluxe, just because this is my Soundwave, man. This is my guy. This was my childhood Soundwave. It's still my favorite Soundwave toy ever. Notice what I'm saying there. I'm not saying that this is the best one. I'm not saying that everyone will love this one. But this is my favorite Soundwave. And it always will be. So when I do a War for Cybertron shelf, which I have right now, by the way, it's always going to be this Soundwave front and center. In terms of new design things for War for Cybertron, like a lot of these Cybertron designs, it really is just the G1 character concepts made a little bit more Xbox 360. Soundwave looks more or less the same, but I really love his shoulders for some reason. I don't know why, but that has changed my brain chemistry in terms of what I think of when I think of the Soundwave silhouette, and I'm always disappointed when he doesn't have these big shoulder spikes. Alongside that, his head is a little bit meaner looking, but for the most part, the only other major new design is the fact that he now turns into a truck that looks a bit like a surveillance truck. It's a good looking alternate mode. Because of my love for this design and this toy, it actually is my favorite Soundwave alternate mode. But it's not one that I would be screaming up from the rooftop saying that we absolutely need to stick to this. I just think that an armored truck works for the guy. But what about that Fall of Cybertron Soundwave? I mean, it's an amazing figure. Looks really good. Well, the reason why I wouldn't put that on my War for Cybertron shelf is because I put it on my IDW shelf. The IDW Transformers was my favorite piece of Transformers media ever. I'm talking about IDW 1.0 that included things like More Than Meets the Eye, Till All Are One, Lost Light. Alongside that, it has one of my favorite Soundwaves ever. A Soundwave that slowly becomes disenfranchised with the Decepticons, is hurt by Megatron turning into an Autobot, but eventually becomes an ally to the Autobots himself, and gives his life in order to aid in defeating Unicron. I adore this Soundwave, and as you might notice from a number of the panels I'm using, he used the Fall of Cybertron design, and it is more based off the Fall of Cybertron toy than even the Fall of Cybertron game models. So if you want to make an IDW shelf, this is the Soundwave to use. It really is. Even his proportions and height work better than any other Soundwave you could possibly use for IDW. But when I think of what is IDW Soundwave's iconic look, it's this one. Of course, if we're going to talk about IDW, we might as well talk about IDW 2.0, in which it's the Siege Soundwave. Just use the Siege Soundwave. We're going to talk about him again later, but they literally just modeled him after the Siege toy. We'll complete our comic book trifecta to talk about Skybound. Now, I did a whole video on Skybound characters and which toys to use, so I'm not going to spend long here. Here's what I'm going to say though. In between me publishing that video and making this one, they've announced that they are re-releasing the Netflix Soundwave. My big thing in that video was I said don't go for the Netflix Soundwave because it's way too expensive on the aftermarket. But if they're going to re-release him with better paint and his cassettes, go with that one with Skybound Soundwave. Skybound Soundwave is literally just the G1 character. That is the best toy of G1 Soundwave ever put in the main line. Sure, we can talk about Masterpiece or other things, but when it comes to just your normal Classics Universe/Generations figures, that's the best one. So just wait for the Legacy Leader Class Soundwave, and it will be your wonderful Skybound Soundwave. We gotta talk about the movies now. Okay, movie Soundwave is the worst version of Soundwave. I'm sorry, that's not me trying to be mean, that's not me trying to be a jerk. Movie Soundwave is the worst Soundwave. It doesn't have anything about Soundwave that you or anyone else likes. I know people who like the toys and the designs, sure, but I don't know, man. There's just nothing here for me. Even still, Soundwave made his first appearance in Revenge of the Fallen, where he actually has a cool satellite mode? I love that, actually. That's a wonderful alternate mode for Soundwave. The original Deluxe Soundwave toy is a nostalgic favorite. I had this one as a kid. I thought it was alright. I did like how they made it to where he could do a satellite or turn into a kind of BS spaceship. It's a shame that the Studio Series Soundwave sucks. And then we can go over to Dark of the Moon Soundwave, and this design is cursed, man. Okay, there was a Deluxe Soundwave. Oh, that one got cancelled. Well, there's a Human Alliance Soundwave. Oh, that one's crap. There was a Cyberverse Soundwave. Oh, that one's the wrong color and is also supposed to be the Prime Soundwave somehow? Oh, there's the movie trilogy Soundwave. That one got canceled. There's the movie Advance Soundwave. Okay, that's great. How much money do you think that one goes for now? It's the only way to get that mold. There's a movie The Best Soundwave. Okay, movie The Best Soundwave. It's Human Alliance Soundwave without the Laserbeak, without the Mr. Gold, and it still doesn't look good. Like, I don't know why, but very specifically, this Soundwave design has just never gone off without a hitch. The only one to ever become majorly available was the Human Alliance Soundwave, and it's a mess. Don't get me wrong, that deluxe Soundwave looks amazing. I would love to have that in my collection, but it was never released in the United States. It was barely released in the rest of the world. Now, to be fair, there was a Studio Series Soundwave for Dark of the Moon. And you want to know something? It's a good figure. It is. It's a very good figure. It has a great transformation. The color scheme's a bit dull, but it is accurate to the movies, and you had a tiny laser beak. It is the best version of movie Soundwave to get as a figure. So as cursed as Dark of the Moon was when it came to this poor Soundwave design, at least we eventually got a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And then finally, if we're going to talk movie Soundwaves, we gotta talk about the Bumblebee movie Soundwave. For him, we did eventually get the Voyager class figure from Studio Series. One of the best looking Soundwaves ever in robot mode. The vehicle mode, though, has always been a bit divisive. I've heard so many people complain about this Soundwave. I'll be honest, I don't get it. It's supposed to be an alien shuttle. It works for that. I kinda like how it looks. Is it my favorite vehicle mode Soundwave has ever had? No. My favorite one is an armored truck or a Predator drone. Even still, I think this works for a Soundwave, and you can deploy Ravage, Rumble, and any other cassettes we might get from that vehicle mode, which I think just makes it even cooler. And there you have it. Literally every major appearance of Soundwave and the best figure they got. But there's been more Soundwaves than just that. And what about recreations of past Soundwaves? We're going to go into a lot of really cool Soundwaves that can just kind of fill in gaps. But first, if we're going to go all the way back to G1, you would find that most collectors seem to agree that Masterpiece is where you get definitive figures. And I do have to say, one of my favorite experiences with Transformers Masterpiece ever was Masterpiece Soundwave. This still is the gold standard for Masterpiece figures for me. And I know people really like Acoustic Wave, that third-party version put out by Fans Toys. It just doesn't have the same soul, man. I've messed with it. I think it's alright, but for my money, Masterpiece Soundwave, the original Masterpiece Soundwave, is still the only name to talk about when it comes to a Masterpiece shelf. But there's still a lot of really fun figures out there, even if a lot of them aren't necessarily what you think of when you think of Soundwave. For instance, if we want to talk about the basically second time Soundwave was ever turned into a toy, it's Machine Wars. Sure, there was an Action Master, but when it comes to after G1, Machine Wars Soundwave was our first reuse of the name, and this is a very different type of Soundwave. A massive missile truck that has a good beefy robot mode, and the little satellite dish is something we would later see in a lot of other Soundwaves, like Cyberverse Soundwave and the Authentic Soundwave. All I'm going to say is, this is not the most wild reinvention of the Soundwave name. That's because Beast Wars Soundwave exists. Look at this thing. So in Beast Wars, they had a toy line exclusive faction called the Mutants. And the Mutants didn't have robot modes. They'd have one animal mode and transform into a different animal mode. Soundwave here turned into a bat and a crocodile. So I want you to imagine that you're a fan from the G1 days, right? You know G1 Soundwave. You fell in love with G1 Soundwave. And then you kind of just have to sit around waiting for him to come back. You see Beast Wars Soundwave, a Machine Wars Soundwave, and eventually you even see Cybertron Soundwave. And he's the closest out of any of them to being your Soundwave, but he's still not quite there. Well, imagine how it must have felt when you heard a new line called Transformers Titanium was going to finally release G1 Soundwave, one that turns into the cassette tape deck, and was going to come with a laser beak. And then you got this figure. Literally just a couple years later, Takara Tomy puts out this guy, music label Soundwave. He is a deluxe class transformer, he fits with your classics figures, and he is a working MP3 player. He is still one of the best looking Soundwave figures of all time, a figure I would love to one day add to my collection. Of course, G1 Soundwave wasn't the only Soundwave to get fun curios. If we want to go back to animated, you had the Activator Soundwave. So, animated didn't really have one-step changers, they had activators. You hit a switch, it transforms most of the way, but you still have a highly articulated minifigure. The Activator Soundwave was one of the best figures, and it still looks really good to this day. Speaking of curios to come from the later cartoons, you have Prime Beast Hunter Soundwave. Look at this friggin' dude. Soundwave looking like he's about to go into Mad Max world. Alongside that, Soundwave wasn't just a retool with new colors, he came with a new character. Instead of Laserbeak, you now had Ravage. And it's not the best Ravage, but hey, it's kinda cool that in Prime you could get Laserbeak, Rumble, and Ravage in admittedly pretty weird ways. Speaking of weird, check out this thing! Tablet Soundwave. Now, I forget the name of the company, I'm going to put it up here, but this company had a deal with Takara Tomy. They made this Soundwave that transforms into a tablet and includes a Laserbeak. Now, the robot mode isn't exactly the most posable thing in the world, but that's not the cool thing. The cool thing is that this big robot mode with three-dimensional shapes transforms into what is effectively a sheet of paper. It goes from an incredibly thin tablet into a fully functioning robot. How does that work? Now here's a Soundwave I had never heard of until I started making this video. Apparently, at some point there was something released called My Busy Book, and it came with non-transforming figures of what they considered the 6 core Transformer characters: Optimus, Bumblebee, Hot Rod, Megatron, Starscream, and Soundwave. Each of them had a robot mode and a vehicle mode. They couldn't transform, but they were just supposed to be depictions of the characters, with the book explaining who they were. We already talked about him, but we'll mention him again. Siege Soundwave was one of our first looks at what a new Voyager Soundwave could be. Now, the Netflix Soundwave really ate this guy's lunch, but he was an amazing figure. And I'll say it, I like his vehicle mode so much. Not too long ago, Hasbro had the idea of mass-producing non-transforming Transformer figures called Transformers Red. Now, I like non-transforming Transforming figures. I adore 3-0, I like Super 7, I'll even defend the Action Masters. You can make some amazing figures. Red, unfortunately, used really bad plastic. The sculpting was always good, the characters always looked perfect, but when you tried to mess with the figures, they were so fragile and so loose and just a nightmare to try to pose. Even still, Soundwave actually had a really nice figure. The joints don't feel super good, but the design is on point. You have so many amazing points of articulation, and you can get so many great poses. It's a really nice Soundwave, and it's one that I wish I had more fun messing with. Speaking of Red Soundwave, Super 7 did an Ultimate Soundwave around the same time. It basically has all the same issues. It looks really nice, the painting is perfect, but the joints don't feel super solid and the articulation isn't the best. Now, kind of moving away from all that, Funko Pops are not my thing. Even still, Soundwave did have a pretty solid Funko Pop released based off his original toy. If you're into Funko Pops, this is a good little guy. Alongside that, if you want just a good picture of what the Sunbow Soundwave character model was like, you have the Super 7 Retro Soundwave. 3 3/4 inches tall, 5 points of articulation. It looks fine. It's a decent little Soundwave, especially if you just want a little Soundwave desk toy. Here's one that blew me away, the Cyberverse Tiny Turbo Changer Soundwave. I don't have much to say, I just think it's cool looking. Alright, that's enough non-transforming and gimmick figures. Why don't we talk about a proper Soundwave again, like the Kingdom Core Soundwave. This is a Legend Scale Soundwave put out by Hasbro, and in all honesty, it's really nice. It has basically all the same articulation as the Netflix Soundwave. It comes with a tiny Laserbeak cassette. It looks perfect, it has a good transformation. In all honesty, if you're a Legends collector, this is a must-have. On the other side of the spectrum, if we wanted to go non-transforming and big and movie, there is the 3-0 Bumblebee Deluxe Soundwave. This figure is massive and beautiful, and I adore it, and I desperately want it. It looks so good, man. Speaking of weirder Soundwaves, though, there's the G.I. Joe Transformers crossover Soundwave. I'm usually not big as to how these figures look, but this Soundwave is actually really nice. I love his alternate mode. He has nice additions of red to his color scheme in robot mode, and he's been paired with Zorana, who is like one of the only G.I. Joe characters I really like. I don't know why they've paired Soundwave and Zorana. It feels like someone at Hasbro is trying to pander directly to me. Out of every G.I. Joe Transformer figure, this is the only one I think I might pick up eventually. We'll wrap this video up talking about a couple of third-party Soundwaves. New Age did an amazing Soundwave. This guy stands at barely 4 inches tall, comes with all his cassettes, and looks beautiful. But my personal favorite third-party Soundwave ever was the Iron Factory Sonic Wave. This is an IDW Soundwave at pocket scale. His articulation is dreamy and buttery smooth. There's a nice heft to this figure. It is a perfect Soundwave. One of my favorite figures of him ever. And a nice little reminder that Iron Factory is one of the best companies doing transforming figures today. And there we have it. Every major version of Soundwave, plus a lot of fun curios and extra figures for anyone who might be trying to kickstart their own Transformers collection. I don't know if we're going to do more of these or if we're going to do other characters from Transformers, go to different franchises, but I've really enjoyed researching all these Soundwave figures and just finding out how many weird ones were out there. At the end of the day, though, I would like to think that we all got to know Soundwave just a little bit better. But hey, what about you guys? You've heard me yap for almost 30 minutes now about what Soundwave figures I like or don't like. What's your favorite Soundwaves? What's your favorite versions of Soundwave? What are Soundwaves that you would love to see in a Legacy United wave or a redo from Hasbro? For me personally, I want Masterpiece War for Cybertron Soundwave, and I want Planet X to do it, because I know it would be amazing. Look at all the Planet X figures, they are all great. Alongside that, in all honesty, I really want a deluxe Earthspark Soundwave. I think that's the big Soundwave figure I'm waiting for right now. Alongside that, guys, thank you for watching. Let me know what other characters you might want me to do. I'm sure there's plenty of Transformers that you could do this type of video with. I'm looking at the Seekers, Optimus, maybe even a character like Knockout or Galvatron. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Let me know what else you would like to see, and tell me what Soundwaves would fill up your perfect Soundwave shelf.